Hello, this is Sara Flack, the Education Coordinator at the Child Advocacy Center of the Finger Lakes. Today we'll be discussing human trafficking, myth or fact. I want you to think about some of the most common statements that you've heard regarding human trafficking and what you believe it to be. Today we're going to look at some of the most common things that are said about human trafficking and figure out whether they are in fact true or a myth. Our first statement is that human trafficking is always or usually a violent crime. Myth or fact? It is by far the most pervasive myth about human trafficking. People tend to believe that it involves kidnapping or otherwise physically forcing someone into a situation. In reality, most human traffickers use psychological means such as trickery, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening victims into providing commercial sex or exploitative labor. Next, all human trafficking involves commercial sex. Again, that is a myth. Human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to get another person to provide labor or commercial sex. Worldwide, experts believe there are more situations of labor trafficking than of sex trafficking. However, there is much wider awareness of sex trafficking in the United States than of labor trafficking. Only undocumented foreign nationals get trafficked in the United States. That is also false. Polaris has worked on thousands of cases of trafficking involving foreign national survivors who are legally living and/or working in the United States. These include survivors of both sex and labor trafficking. Human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. Another myth, human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries including restaurants, cleaning services, construction, factories, and many more. Only women and girls can be victims and survivors of sex trafficking. That's a myth. Human trafficking is a very inclusive crime. It does not have any prejudice for race, sex, gender, ethnicity, or age. One study actually estimates that as many as half of sex trafficking victims and survivors are male. Advocates believe that percentage may be even higher, but that male victims are far less likely to be identified, as they tend not to report. LGBTQ boys and young men are seen as particularly vulnerable to trafficking. Human trafficking involves moving, traveling, or transporting a person across a border. This is one of the most common things that I hear when I present to other places and other professionals, as well as to young people. And I think that the main reason is because of how we view it in the media. A lot of times when I ask people what they think of when they think of human trafficking, they immediately tell me about the movie Taken. The reality is that human trafficking is often confused with human smuggling, which involves illegal border crossings. In fact, the crime of human trafficking does not require any movement whatsoever. Survivors can be recruited and trafficked in their own hometowns, even their own homes. All commercial sex is human trafficking. And a myth, all commercial sex involving a minor is legally considered human trafficking. Commercial sex involving an adult is human trafficking if the person providing commercial sex is doing so against his or her will as a result of force, fraud, or coercion, which I'll talk more about later. People being trafficked are physically unable to leave. While that is sometimes the case, more often, however, people in trafficking situations stay for reasons that are more complicated. Some lack the basic necessities to physically get out, such as transportation or a safe place to live. Some are afraid for their safety. Some have been so effectively manipulated that they do not identify at that point as being under the control of another person. Labor trafficking is only a problem in developing countries. Labor trafficking occurs in the United States and in other developed countries, but is reported at lower rates than sex trafficking. Lastly, traffickers target victims they do not know. I'm sure at this point you've realized that these are all myths. The reality is that many survivors have been trafficked by romantic partners, including spouses, and by family members, including their parents. The actual breakdown is that 90% of victims know their traffickers and many times love and rely on them. Immediate family members who have trafficked their victims account for 36% of all trafficking cases. Behind that, and 27%, is the romantic partner. 14% of victims are trafficked by friends, and another 14% by their employers. And only 9% of traffic survivors were trafficked by a stranger. Broken down some of those myths, let's talk about what human trafficking actually is. Human trafficking is the practice of exploiting a person for the purpose of sexual or labor servitude using force, fraud, or coercion. You've heard me say those things a few times. So what is force? Force includes any instance of violence used to bring a person into trafficking or to keep them feeling trapped. This could be physical or sexual violence, and as well as isolation. Isolation doesn't always mean that that person is held against their will. They could be physically restrained in other ways, like geographically from resources and their supports. Under the New York state law, anyone engaging in prostitution due to force, fraud, or coercion is a victim. Anyone under the age of 18 who exchanges a sex act of anything deemed of value is a victim. Things of value, a lot of times we originally turned right to money, but that could be other basic necessities like a safe place to stay, shelter, clothing, food, or other things of value, drugs and alcohol, clothing, transportation, new electronics, jewelry. Youth are trafficked by a third party, family, friend, peer, etc., to a customer. So in human trafficking, we always have three parties. We have the trafficker themselves, which we sometimes refer to as a pimp. We have the person who's being trafficked, and then we have the person who is purchasing that victim, whether that's in exchange for labor or for sexual acts. Fraud includes lies or deception. The trafficker might tell the victim things like, I really love you and I need you to do this so we can stay together. Or, you're so beautiful, come work for me and you'll be the next top model. Traffickers can sometimes also use coercion. Coercion includes threats made against the victim or their loved ones. They may say things like, you can leave me, but I'll go get your sister. Or, if you don't do what I say, I'll tell everyone what you have done. Another crime that we often see is CSEC. CSEC is the commercial sexual exploitation of children. CSEC, in any instance where a person is under the age of 18, has exchanged a sexual act or performance for something of value. CSEC is a form of child sexual abuse. It is an exchange between two people. So while human trafficking involved a third party, CSEC is directly between two people. Some examples could include stripping, exotic dance, explicit photography or video, and minor sex trafficking. and sextortion, which we see quite a bit in this day and age, especially with our teens and young people. Sextortion is exploitation of explicit photographs and videos. It often relies on threats and blackmail, and a large percentage of perpetrators are unknown. This is because it's typically digital exchanges that are occurring, whether that's through texting, chat rooms, or social media platforms. Here are some resources for some more information, as well as if you suspect somebody is being trafficked or you yourself are being trafficked. Here are some hotline phone numbers for some assistance. At the bottom, you will note my email. If you or your agency would like more information or a more comprehensive training on the details of human trafficking, how it's happening in our local area, and what you can do to identify and support victims, please reach out to my email, sarah@cacfingerlakes.org, to schedule a training.